Hi there. I want to talk today about freedom of expression, and particularly as it applies to a recent controversy we've had here in Canada, where a leading magazine published an article which was originally entitled Too Asian, and it talked about the fact that some white, if you want, non-Asian students didn't want to go to certain universities where there was a high concentration of students of Asian origin, whether they are first generation parents or been in Canada for generations. And the white students are quoted in the article as saying that they felt the Asian students studied too hard, and that the white students, again quoted in the article, preferred to party or not study quite so hard, or didn't want to have to compete with these hardworking Asian students. And some Asian students are quoted as saying that they prefer to be with other Asian students because the white students spend so much time drinking at parties and so forth. It wasn't a very brilliant or deep article. It did describe a fairly widespread phenomenon, and that is that, first of all, students of Asian origin, particularly East Asian and particularly Chinese, because in Canada that's the largest source of, or ethnic origin, if you want, of people of Asian origin, that they are, relative to their share of the population, they're overrepresented in our universities. And this reflects the fact that they study harder. And of course, therefore, they have every right to be in the universities, because the universities, at the present time, acceptance or admittance is based on your marks, which is probably the right thing to do. But there are people who don't like it, who feel that it was more fun when universities were more about partying. Probably, though, not all white kids react the way the kids in this article seem to feel. I am sure there are Asian origin kids who prefer to go to a university where there's more partying. So there's a certain amount of exaggeration or stereotyping, but it's a story. I mean, every story I read in a magazine doesn't strike me necessarily as being accurate or brilliant, and this one probably is not brilliant, but it does reflect a widespread attitude. Now, what's come up now as a result of this is there are all kinds of Chinese Canadians who are insisting that this magazine should be boycotted. We have a professor at the university here in Vancouver, Henry Yu, who is more or less encouraging his students to boycott the owner of the magazine, which is a company that's involved in the distribution of mobile telephones. We have a senator who stood up and said, you know, because in Canada, and again, it's not a policy that I agree with, but the government subsidizes Canadian publications in order that they might survive against American competition. Maclean's magazine, which is the magazine involved in this article, gets $1.5 million from the government. So the senator, Vivian Poy, is saying that money should be withdrawn because of this terrible article. What bothers me in this is this tremendous group pressure from various vocal people in this Chinese Canadian, largely the Chinese community, who are trying to shut down what is essentially the freedom of expression of the magazine. There's nothing in that article that is, anti-anybody. Henry Yu, for example, this professor at UBC, who is of Chinese origin, I mean, he wrote an article in the local newspaper here in Vancouver where he said that Vancouver is becoming an Asian city, and he lamented the fact that a certain part of Vancouver doesn't get it and is still, quote, according to him, as white as the driven snow. So, like, he's bothered by the fact that some areas of Vancouver are still not Asian enough for him. To me, it's just a silly comment, but I'm not suggesting that the Vancouver Sun should be boycotted because they printed an article written by Henry Yu. There are Asians who say Chinese who choose to live where there are lots of Chinese. There are others who specifically choose to live where there aren't a lot of Chinese, for whatever reason. The first group because they feel more comfortable with other Asians, and the second group because they want to give their kids perhaps a different experience and not to be living only with their own kind. It is an unfortunate fact that in our schools and universities, we do tend to see people kind of grouping together in cliques based on their ethnic origin. I think that's too bad, but it is a fact. And to report on that is not grounds for a massive indignation by any particular ethnic group. And I think it's scary that every time a group feels that they're in some way offended by an article, that they have the right to boycott it, demand that its funding be taken away, boycott the owners who are in other businesses. In other words, to try and gang up on and pressure these publications to produce articles that they like. I mean, they have every right to write letters to that magazine, to comment in other publications, to do whatever they want, be as indignant and offended as they want to be. No one can prevent them from doing that. But it's the idea that they're going to, through their collective muscle, force these publications to dance to their tune. That's pretty scary stuff. And they've been able to get some of the more, quote, progressive municipalities in Canada, like in Victoria and Vancouver, and they tried it in Toronto, to get the municipal government to come out and make a statement condemning this magazine article. I mean, has the municipal government in Victoria got nothing better to do than to worry about what is written in a magazine on things that have nothing to do with their municipality? Besides which, if you read the article, there is nothing particularly offensive, nothing censorable in the article to most objective observers. So, insofar as Canada is concerned, I mean, that Asians have a reputation of being hardworking and studious and not party animals, there's probably some truth to that. That's not to say that all Asians are that way. Yeah, it's unfortunate that the term Asian is used indiscriminately to apply both to people who just arrived here and people who have been here for 5 generations, but the vast majority of Asians or people of Asian origin, in fact, did arrive the last 30 years insofar as Canada is concerned. I think that's a good thing, personally. I think that Canada, I don't believe in multiculturalism per se. Most of the people of Asian origin that I see, young people, they speak English, and overwhelmingly their culture is not that different from that of other Canadians. And I think it's a good thing that the people gradually get used to the idea that someone who's Canadian can have a funny name, like when I was a kid growing up, my name is Kaufman. That wasn't quite as good as Smith, Jones, or even Lapierre, because originally Canada was like English and French. So if you had a Polish or German or Italian name, that was kind of second class. That's no longer the case. Well, by the same token, you may look Indian, you may look Chinese, you may look African, you're just as Canadian. I think people are gradually getting used to that. But still, it remains true that people in certain groups do tend to stick together, which I think is a little unfortunate. And as a result, that can cause certain reactions amongst other people in the community. And so newspapers and magazines should be allowed to write about that. In this particular magazine, the Maclean's magazine, the article didn't say that we should reduce or limit or restrict the number of Asians at university. There's no such implication at all. If anything, it suggested that this was not the correct approach, and I think it almost implied that the whites were lazy or jealous or just didn't work hard enough or whatever. Anyway, there's nothing there. I should add that some of the loudest spokespeople here, like Henry Yu, I mean, he strikes me as a raving ethnic chauvinist for sort of Chinese Canadianism. I mean, he recently received, I should add, now that I can go 15 minutes on YouTube, he managed to receive $900,000 from the federal government for a Chinese-Canadian history portal. $900,000. And in accepting the money, he said, yes, you know, we have to reassess how we look at the history of Canada, because after all, he said, 100 years before Confederation, there were 2 Chinese sailors on a ship that arrived on the west coast of Canada. And so really, the Chinese were interacting with the Aboriginals here at the same time as the Europeans. And so the Chinese are also a founding people. Well, that's just pure nonsensical historical revisionism. In fact, the Europeans were settled here in the 1600s. I mean, John Cabot was an Italian. He was here in the 1500s. He was the captain of a ship. We have Basques settling around the East Coast, Basque fishermen. We had the massive arrivals of United Empire loyalists, including Germans and Dutch, all before these 2 Chinese sailors showed up on a boat. But insofar as founding people, every country has its myth of origin and its historical sort of founding traditions. And Canada speaks English and French. And in the early years, it was this interaction between the British, the French, and the natives that formed the core of what Canada became through its institutions and languages and so forth. That's not to say that we haven't had all kinds of Italian, Chinese, Ukrainian, German, Japanese, Jamaican, you name it, Indian, others come here and contribute. Of course they do. But they all end up speaking English, and they all conform to this Canadian culture that was originally established by those founding people. So I was not born here. I was born in Sweden, 62 years ago. I came over here when I was 5, but my family conformed to the culture that was already here. So we are not a founding people. Similarly, this Vivian Poy lady, who is a senator, I found a speech of hers she gave to the Progressive Muslims Society of Canada, which is just full of the most amazing stuff. Like she tells the progressive Muslims that, she's a Canadian senator, lived here for 50 years. She says, I'm in my uncle's company in Hong Kong, we had a Muslim employee, and all I know is that Muslims, they're just like us. They look like Chinese, except they don't eat pork. Well, that's not true, because a lot of Muslims in China don't look Chinese. So she's kind of wiped them out, And then she goes on about how powerful the Ming Navy was, had ships that were larger than Columbus's ships, and she fantasizes that, if the Ming Navy had come across the Portuguese ships, they would have crushed them. Well, no, they didn't. They didn't. The Portuguese ships arrived in Ming China and founded Macau, and their ships weren't crushed. But yes, the Chinese ships were larger. So then there's more of this kind of stuff. Anyway, I think I just shudder at this sort of ethnic chauvinism that's springing up, and its ability to garner government funding and to put pressure on publications to try to force them to apologize or to shut off their funding. Scary stuff. I hope it dies soon. Anyway, there's my Christmas Boxing Day rant before I head off skiing. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.